Welcome back to Beyond the Hyphen, where we explore the crossroads of politics, diplomacy, and global affairs. In this episode, we're joined by Maryland House Majority Leader David Moon, one of the first two Korean Americans ever elected to the Maryland State Legislature. He is known for his progressive activism, fighting for civil liberties, the legalization of recreational marijuana, and championing criminal justice reform. Tune in as we get into how he has navigated the floor as the majority leader in the Maryland House of Delegates, what it means to challenge both parties from the left, and the rising presence of Maryland in national politics. Delegate Moon, we really appreciate you being here with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to join.
So, just diving right in, along with Delegate Mark Chang, you were the first Korean Americans elected into the Maryland General Assembly in the state's history back in 2015. And if I'm not mistaken, you are also the first Asian American House Majority Leader to serve recently. And can you just talk about what it means to have broken those barriers and what your mindset was kind of going into it back then in 2015?
Sure. And it's interesting. I'll actually correct one thing. Many people think I was the first Asian majority leader, but I was actually, in fact, not. Kumar
Okay.
Barve preceded me a few majority leaders ago, and he was one of the pioneering Asian electeds in the assembly. So we've thankfully had a history of folks, Valderrama, Susan Lee, both Valderramas, Susan Lee, Kumar Barve, and the like that sort of laid the groundwork for those of us who came later. And so I guess that's one place where I'll start. So much of this is really building on what others have done. And at a very basic level, I was a activist really before I ran for office, and so a lot of what I thought was possible for myself was 100% based on what others before me had done. And so I have very clear memories of being involved in politics in high school and in college. And in my first freshman year summer, I went to the ACLU's Washington, D.C. lobbying office to intern. And I spoke with my intern supervisor, and she said, "Wow, you're really smart and good at this. Like, you should think about office one day." And I said, I don't think that's possible. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. And in Maryland, basically all of the elected officials are white or black. And I'm a part of a tiny minority population here. So I don't think I'm viable. I'm totally fine just working for other people. And that was my mindset. That would have been back in like 1998. So, um, but since then, I started to work for a lot of candidates. And one of them, Nancy Navarro, was a Venezuelan immigrant, a school board member in the county. And I went on to run her campaign for county council, where she won, much to some people's surprise. And it was right around that time that Montgomery County was beginning to become majority minority. But again, as I knew all through that period, um, majority minority did not mean Asians or any other group were suddenly the majority. It meant you could cobble together a coalition of different groups to build a majority, and that is really my entry point into electoral politics. Again, as an AAPI member. So to break that barrier with Mark Chang, and I'm sure the story is the same for him, but to break that barrier that first time we ran, it did take others coming before us to make it at least even not laughable that we could run and win. And then, of course, we had to build coalitions of multiple group types in order to carry the day. So that's the story in Maryland and probably many other communities for not just AAPI members, but people in sort of groups that are either small or small but growing. So, you know, the future is still yet to be written.
So was there any hesitation or fear, for lack of a better word, between you or Delegate Chang back then, just to, break that barrier to build those coalitions?
Well, for me, no, not really. But again, if you had polled me in 1998 as as a college student in the area, again, I didn't see myself as viable then in 98 as a generic, Asian win in the area. I don't know if it was true or not, but again, this is just how I felt. And I finally ran myself in 2014. So that's a decade and a half at least that went by before I had started to think it was possible. But two things had changed. As I had noted, it was not just that Montgomery County became majority minority, and now we were in the post-Iraq War era. So Democrats really realigned and took over, the whole of Montgomery County and places like that during that era. And so I think a lot of these were necessary steps, but the key is having simply worked on campaigns myself, and that was the necessary um, bit, right? I had to be able to peek behind the curtain, see how the thing actually worked, and say, "Oh, okay, that's if I can break a campaign down into X, Y, and Z fundamentals, that I can do."
Mhm.
And so I worked in campaigns for some time, um, and after at some point it was like, yeah, I could do this. Um, at least as it was demystified as to what those steps were. So that's my advice to any young person coming up these days is just dive right into a campaign. If you're actually interested in this, and that'll be the best thing you could really do, just to meet people, network, see what it's all about. And you might decide it's not for you. But if it is for you, um, it's really you're not going to learn something from a book better than actually just going and joining a campaign.
Yeah, I think a lot of young AAPI folks don't really see themselves in the politics world before they actually take step, and it kind of deters that interest or even just going out to try. But going back to you breaking that barrier for Korean Americans, um, I think a lot of the fact that it is a breaking of the barrier is because the population of citizens, of Korean Americans, of AAPI citizens, saw more of themselves in the government and representation, right? But there's this also other aspect of your background. You are a lawyer. In a previous episode, we talked about what it was like being from the STEM field as a politician with Delegate Chow Wu, and being someone from the public health sector with Senator Lamb, and the perks of such of that. But I'm curious what having gone through law school all those years, and having that background as a lawyer, being an activist, has done in terms of shaping how you approach policy making. Do you see any differences between, you know, you coming from a legal background and then others in the legislature?
Sure. Well, and I would actually break this down two ways because, for one, yes, I'm a lawyer. And so that I could tell you a whole lot about how that shapes the way I do lawmaking and what I focus on. But the other aspect of it is that I'm a public policy attorney, and really one with an opinion. It's not like, lawyers, they take clients and they just don't have their own viewpoints. No, no, I've quite deliberately been working on projects and campaigns and things like that that are ones that advance my goals for how to make a better world, right? And so, so I would say I have two very distinct viewpoints professionally coming into lawmaking, and one is as a policy advocate. And from that perspective, I've been trying on many issues to try and implement broad frameworks to do so over long periods of time, really, and spot opportunities and really treat the policy making in a very professional, careerist manner, right? Like I check back on how my bills are doing. I will years later, like to this year, I fixed a bill that I had passed 7 years ago to lower the cost of building childcare in Montgomery County. And I checked 7 years to see later to see how it was working, and it was totally not working. So we went in and rewrote the law this year. And I think that sort of eye towards the policymaking process really comes from um, that sort of nonprofit policy implementation background. And, lots of it too, right? Like knowing voting rights or criminal justice reform or immigration reform, right? These are among my interests. You just have to keep a large eye on the types of reforms and improvements you can make. And when the opportunity arises, really run with it and try and do whichever of the ones are that you think can get done at that time. And in other cases, it's building for a singular goal, no matter how hard it is, and just laying the groundwork over years for stuff like that. And stuff for me, that's been things like getting nonviolent drug offenders out of the criminal justice system and into the public health system instead. And you don't really solve these things. It's just you're the latest of the generation to get past the baton to
Yeah.
work on it, as best you can, and then pass the baton to the next
Mhm.
on many of these types of issues. So again, that's been for me this nice mix of bringing my legal training and really a lot of my policy advocate um, background into the process. And of course, I was a political consultant, so I do all of this with a heavy eye towards politics.
So you talked about criminal justice reform. Um, whether that pertains to sentencing, law enforcement, accountability, or something else of that arena. As someone who has consistently worked on and championed these issues that we see in the justice system, what aspect would you say of it do you think is most often overlooked or misunderstood by the general public, and or policymakers that don't really, focus as much on the criminal justice system?
I don't know if people know this or not, but I mean, the truth of the matter is, there's usually very broad social trends that are happening that make crime rates move up and down. And that's true for many types of crime, right? Not just violent crime. Violent crime, overdoses and drugs and things like this. Yes, there's policy involved. Yes, and that's not to say as policymakers we shouldn't address these things. Of course, we should address them. But I've been now, I think I had 11 years, 11 sessions, in Annapolis. And I can't tell you that the crime rate, the number of murders happening or the number of car thefts happening has anything to do with us. Again, we pass policies to address aspects of what's going on. But will I say that the rates went down this year because of something we did, and they went up 2 years ago because of something we did that failed? No, I just don't think that's how it goes. And I remember, getting beat over the head by one of the Fox News folks asking about, youth crime. And I said, well, the funny thing is, if you're blaming it on youth reforms we recently did, why are the youth carjacking rates going up in DC? DC did not pass the same laws that we did, and
Mhm.
yet these numbers are going up across the region.
Yeah.
So this is to say, we do these things, and one of the surprising aspects, hopefully for the public, is what I'm talking about. Um, People love to blame and I guess sometimes applaud policymakers for things like crime rates, but I have one to shy from the business of taking credit for or taking particular blame for crime rates. Instead, I like to actually just look at the data, look at causation versus correlation, talk to experts, and just see where there are ways we can attempt improvements. And again, go back later and see if they actually did something. So that's the broad enterprise. And we get a lot of folks who unfortunately like to take credit for crime rates going down. I mean, a lot of people who like to throw blame around. And there was like a circular firing squad going on when crime rates were going up. So at this point, I've accepted that that's part of the job. So instead, I set these goals up like shifting people from nonviolent drug offenders from the incarceration system to public health, and I'll just measure it in um, thousands of Marylanders saved each year from incarceration and instead routed to a different outcome, and just try and build baskets of um, head counts where I'm like, these are people, we're helping people. We help a few thousand people at a time, hopefully every year, um, to get improved outcomes. And really, it also is benefit to the taxpayers. They're getting more realistic and efficient uses of their tax dollars, not these pie in the sky things like, oh, we're gonna design this whole system and I promise you it's gonna do X, Y, or Z. Like I mean, again, we get a lot of that from the political system, but
Yeah.
I don't think it does the public or the discourse much good.
Kind of tacking off, you talked about promises, right? The political system, the government making promises to their constituents, um, Maryland specifically, right? Whether it's, I know you worked on marijuana, right? The use of recreational marijuana and its legalization. A lot of the conversation shifts to the core idea of equity, expungement, community reinvestment, equal access. Do you feel like the state has followed through on the promises that they've, given out?
Sure. In many, again, you have to sort of ignore the sort of noise of the discussion and really look at fundamentals. And 11 years ago, when I came into office, I was very disappointed to see that the state was spending in totality more on its correction system than it was on all of its colleges and universities. Um, and but again, due to a lot of these discussions over the past decade or so, our incarcerated population has been steadily going down. And so I think we really have been sweeping a lot of these folks that would be better served in different situations. We've spared them from incarceration. And I think a lot of that work is measurable, and you can see recidivism rates declining for certain populations. But the drug war, and you talk about marijuana and expungement. Again, I say these are not things that you per se solve, right? I wish I could say we were going to solve um, inequity and things like that. But really, we're in the business of mitigating, improving, preventing, right? All of that sort of stuff. So again, from the last 11 years, prison population's going down. We're moving a lot of nonviolent offenders out of the system. Are there still problems? Of course. And one of the reasons, I talk about, I come at this from a long-term advocate's perspective. So you build a long-term plan. And one of my, expungement and drug reform sort of go hand in hand, but they're two of my longer-term enterprises. And so when you look at cannabis, I remember talking to some nonprofit funders long ago, and they said, "Oh, this is not real work. Like, this is just thing that white people who um, are from the suburbs care about, but the real work is like the nitty-gritty of incarceration, all of the other offenses. Um, and I don't think that's fair because in a state like Maryland, number one, you had black residents in particular getting arrested at multiple rates of multiple times versus anyone else in the population for the same offense. And it really, you can see it in the expungement numbers now. Hundreds of thousands of these cases, and they are now expungible and got automatically expunged, right? So we took care of much of that. Um, but my interest was not marijuana per se, and this is where I think my view on the strategy disagreed with that particular funder I was talking about. I had a hope that once you got past that, you could get to all the other things, start looking at inequities in all sorts of drug sentencing, um, outcomes and all sorts of other offenses too. Now, I was partly right and partly wrong. The funder was correct that it's not like once you do cannabis, we've done everything else. Like they were correct. The rest did not just follow. But I was correct that you could use the one to sort of make the parallel case for the others, you know?
Yeah.
So as we did say marijuana reform, um, like for example, I had a bill this year to get rid of a mandatory minimum prison sentence for cannabis possession. That if you possessed a high volume of it, we still had on the books 20-year mandatory minimum prison sentence for that. Well, I could have probably just easily tried to pass that as its own bill, but I was trying to also fix this problem with crack cocaine disparities, where years ago we were jailing black residents for crack possession at much tinier amounts than we were jailing white residents for cocaine possession. And we fixed the sentencing disparity, but we left all the old everyone who was sentenced under the previous rules, we just left them to rot in prison.
Mm.
And that didn't seem right. So I kept attaching the cannabis reform to the fix of that crack cocaine disparity, which
Okay.
was probably the harder way to go. But we fixed it this year after 3 years. No, actually, before, see, it's a relay race. Before I tried to get that crack cocaine thing fixed, and I took that for 3 years and ran with it, and we finally did it this year. One of my colleagues, now a judge, Kathleen Dumais, tried that like 6 years ago. Tried to get that fix as its own bill, and couldn't
Wow.
get crack fix as its own bill. So you know, that's just one anecdote, but it gives you a window into what I mean when I say A, that it's a relay race, and B, that you just keep your eye out for opportunity to move the needle on things, and that sometimes you have to lay these long paths. So cannabis was supposed to lead to other nonviolent drug reforms. And
Mm.
likewise, we got automatic expungement done for cannabis and are now trying to get automatic expungement for other nonviolent petty offenses. So that's just how we roll. We create test cases, and then we try to roll out different permutations and iterations of different things we've tried out.
Yeah, and I think different state, legislatures, they sort of move things in a different pace. Like you said, you kind of inherited this sort of initiative. It was like a relay race. And so, as long as we're speaking about kind of the state government, their differences, Maryland, um, in light of President Trump's recent administration, the first, however, 100 days and 3 weeks, Governor Moore, he's really stepped up, big time and shown how, as a state, from the legislators to the activists and citizens, that Maryland is among the most, if not the most aggressive in terms of making sure that the state holds its own priorities and continues to function in its own way outside of DC. What do you make of how Governor Moore has led Maryland through, again, the first 100 days and 3 weeks since President Trump took office?
I will tell you that Team Maryland has been speaking with one voice to stand up for our residents against this unprecedented assault from the Trump administration. So I'm very pleased that the House Speaker, Adrian Jones, Senate President Bill Ferguson, and the governor have been able to really present a united front against a lot of the economic damage that they're throwing at our residents. So I'll point out a few things. But first that comes to my mind is healthcare protection, where under the first Trump administration, um, they were hot to trot about pulling back on healthcare coverage that we had done under the Obama administration to really increase things like healthcare for young people who often decided to skip health insurance, and people who were sick with debilitating illnesses and were basically being denied health coverage because they were sick. Well, that seems twisted. Those should be exactly the people who are given health coverage. So once they started threatening to undo a lot of those protections, things like young people can stay on their parents' health insurance until age 26. We started putting those policies in place at the state level so that even if the feds got rid of it, we would have state laws that put a lot of that into place. And so we have been carrying forward with all of that. And then this year, now that they're passing these ridiculous budget proposals that are basically designed to give billionaires tax breaks, all while increasing the federal deficit by trillions, literally trillions of dollars. We have had to protect ourselves from all of this too. And so you've seen us having to shore up our funding, unfortunately, take revenue measures to not be able to count on some of the revenue, that the federal government had already promised to us for a number of things. And in terms of revenue that we are losing indirectly, like uh, every every federal job that is lost through a Doge firing
Mhm.
has triggered multiple additional private contractor job losses, and that starts to ripple through. These are folks who are paying less income tax, they're shopping less, so the local governments are collecting less in tax. Our businesses then get hit, the restaurants and the mom and pops that rely on these folks to come through. It's cascading negative effects. But again, I've been very pleased that the Maryland Democrats have stood strong, firm, and united in protecting our residents from this. I wish I could say the same was true for all of the minority party, but early on, some of them, the Republicans in Maryland, started calling the firings a blessing. So this is what we're looking at, So it's a um, Maryland that is unified in trying to protect residents from the federal attack. We're bringing some of the Republicans along, I guess, but a whole bunch of them are unfortunately cheering this along. So um, we stick with one another in these times.
Yeah, and I think we elected a leader in Governor Moore that's kind of set a clear standard from his first day or week in office with regards to what his goals and steps, to achieve his goals are. I know he's emphasized a ton on how the way we approach and view, analyze issues like recreational marijuana, suicide rates in young men, and more is what's helped Maryland and what every state besides Maryland should also focus on. But again, that's where the crucial role of state legislators really getting into the dirty work, like, comes in and take the reins of this progressive leadership and agenda in a more localized way. And for you, you've been very proactive with it. On a more broad level, can you talk a little bit about what your philosophy is when it comes to political change? The partisan divide and always sort of trying to forward that progressive agenda.
That's a very interesting question. I mean, look, eyes on the prize, right? You hope at the end of the day that in a representative democracy, you're putting people up that have the best intentions at heart. And what evidence do you have? Well, what have they done and said before they got there? And what did they do once they actually did get there? And so we're at a tough moment right now. A lot of folks were skittish and cowed after this November election when the Republicans made such grounds. But in a state like Maryland, it's probably even more confusing because, Harris, Biden, Obama, they handily defeat the Republicans in Maryland and did so this time too, even as the rest of the country fell. But as that's true, it's also true that Trump gained vote share in every single county in Maryland, including Montgomery, where I live. And that's deep blue territory where it's a little bit disconcerting and alarming to see something like that. So, but as I like to say, you get into this business and we have no choice but to defend our residents. And so, some of these touchier topics, immigration, transgender issues that people came out of the election skittish about. No, I mean, you have to defend your residents when they're being under attack. Do I think we do frivolous things? No. Of course, we ought not take frivolous actions, but this is a big tent party, and this is one thing that I keep coming back to. Now, on the other hand, again, this is with respect to the November elections. Do I think there's some messages, top lines to be gleaned there? Of course. And the economy continues to come into focus for me. And, at first we were just talking about, the welfare of ordinary Americans and in light of tax cuts. But now this is personal, like the manner in which they're going about this, and they're not even reducing the deficit, but they're actually going after Maryland's interests specifically. We just had, unfortunately, a ratings downgrade from bond rate. Yeah, this might be some nerdy stuff, but basically we borrow money and it's their job to tell people who lend us money how good we are, trustable to pay it back. And we've always been considered the top, most trustable state in this regard. But very recently, one of the ratings agencies downgraded us. Why? They said Maryland is the most exposed state to these federal downsizings. And they started to question a lot of the shots the feds are taking at our state economy. And so now it costs more for Maryland to borrow money. It's really crappy. It's a really crappy situation. And so these things are coming true that that Maryland is being specifically not singled out. I wouldn't say we're being singled out, but we are being disproportionately harmed by this circus of calling federal workers enemies. So it's unfortunate, but my governing philosophy is always you start from the beginning. What does your heart tell you? We have to help people. Is this actually helping people? And I often will pause and wonder, like, are these people who are doing these things,
Mhm.
are they in business to help people? And as I mentioned to you when you asked about criminal justice reform, when I think about impact on the world, I literally sit there and count how many people we're helping every year. Okay, this bill is expunging 5,000 records this year. It's going to help 5,000 people in their maintain employment and not have a ding on their record for something stupid they did 30 years ago, right?
Mhm.
Um, that's all we can do. Governing philosophy. You start from the beginning. Are you actually trying to help people?
Yeah. Yeah, no, a through line of your work kind of has, been that idea of helping people, um, meeting them where they are, protecting our civil liberties. And so I kind of wanted to touch on zooming out of Maryland on what's happening on Capitol Hill, and the White House. You know, Maryland has kind of been very exposed, like you said, been public these past few, however many months, from Abrego Garcia in El Salvador to Netanyahu Senator Van Hollen, he had a pretty, that pretty contentious exchange with Secretary Rubio, I think just yesterday. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, whether it's President Trump's actions or what Senator Van Hollen has been doing and fighting for.
Well, number one, I will tell you that as the party evolves, grows, and as you know, it's very clear we're in a transition period for leadership, and we're about to have new leadership sweep in to the party at some point in various levels and stages. And all of this to me, Van Hollen is demonstrating that he is very fit to lead the Senate. And I'll just put it out there and say it, that he should be a very serious um, option for those looking for a future leader of the Senate. With a lot of what he's been doing in a time of uncertainty where folks don't know what the right move is, he's presented a moral clarity that I think is really commendable, and a straightforwardness in willing to confront it. And I don't think he's been doing it in any sort of crazy way that ought to alienate folks, even though the right is trying to make it out to be that way. I mean, it's long been joked that Maryland it hasn't been known for having bombastic or out there attention elected officials on the national stage. Um, and boy, this one, Van Hollen is really
Yeah.
breaking with at least the perceived norm. And I worked for Jamie Raskin for some time as he was coming up in the system, and he's another one,
Yep.
that I think makes national waves when talking. So all of this for me has been really fun to watch as a Marylander as the discussion continues. Not fun on the problems, but as our people step into the leadership breach and start to be a part of that discussion, it's really gratifying to see.
Yeah, no, these amazing leaders have done a lot, from Governor Moore to Senator Van Hollen to, like you said, Congressman Jamie Raskin. And you as well, Delegate Moon, fighting for our civil liberties and government transparency, really just attacking the root of the problems that we face. As we wrap up here, looking at the unique path that you've taken, and the work you plan to continue to do, what's something that you've done in policy that you are most proud of?
Um, Foster youth work is became a side interest of mine during all of this. I got conscripted into some battles on Judiciary Committee dealing with family law foster youth issues, but this is one of these where and the bill in particular was saving healthcare funding for severely developmentally disabled foster youth. Basically, they would have died without the health services. And we just said, okay, well, they're aging out. They're no longer youths, so they're on their own now. But if you're in the foster system, when you became a ward of the state essentially, right? You don't have the typical family backup and resources there, and so the state steps into it. And like, well, I don't know that many parents would see fit to treat their severely developmentally disabled kids this way, and just became a window into all of it. So among, my win list of bills, there are a couple foster youth bills there that really I are among the bills that I am most proud of. They are absolutely not ones that get any attention whatsoever. They're not sexy, right? They're not hot button topics, but there's this tiny population of kids who sometimes just get overlooked on various things and get screwed by the system, and they just don't have anyone else looking after them. And it's supposed to be the state. So again, the foster youth bills are my sleeper favorites.
Wow, that's really touching to a certain extent. Delegate Moon, thank you again so much for coming on. Your commitment to pushing the needle forward on justice and equity really stands out and has stood out. And we really appreciate just everything that you do for Maryland.
Hey, thanks again for having me.
I hope you all enjoyed that conversation with House Majority Leader David Moon. His insights on justice, equity, and what it means to locally lead in a shifting national landscape really gave us a lot to think about. If you enjoyed this episode, check out the others for more conversations at the intersection of identity, politics, and youth-driven change. And as always, thank you for tuning in. This has been Mark Lee, and I'll see you on the next one.